This presentation was originally given in November of 2016. It is recorded in April of 2020 with only minor edits. I want to start by providing context for my title. The context comes from prisoner Frank MacDonald while he was in Dulman Camp. He said, quote, "Communication with the outside world was meager and very closely guarded. We could not, under any consideration, make mention of the conditions in the camp or complain of the food. Indeed, we saw long sentences imposed on prisoners who attempted to get some idea of the truth to their friends. While we might ask for parcels, we were not allowed ever to suggest that food was really needed. Naturally, these restrictions gave rise to a good deal of ingenuity to evade them. One lad, while riding home, spoke of the lovely camp, the kind guards, and the good food, but in the last paragraph made inquiries somewhat as follows. I say, Dad, have you seen my old school chum, W.E.R, starving? I haven't heard anything from him in a long time." MacDonald continues to write, quote, "The Germans saw nothing wrong, but I have often wondered what feelings were stirred up in that home when his letter was read." Unquote. For the past few years, I have been researching the stories of men and women from Acadia University, the Acadia Collegiate Academy, and the Acadia Ladies Seminary, who participated in the First World War. There are over 600 names on my list. In my research, I found 6 men from campus who became prisoners of war. This slide shows 5 of them. Here you see Arthur Cyril March of the university, Arthur Hilton Cook of the Academy, Clarence William Cook of the university, Roy Basil Estey of the Academy, Stanley Livingston Jones of the university, who died in a prisoner of war camp. Donald Bedford Chase of the university is not in this slide. As far as I know, none of my 6 men left diaries or memoirs. To better understand their time as POWs in Germany, I turned to 3 external sources that are readily available to me. No one in these sources attended Acadia or the Academy. The first source is a book called The Kaisers Guest, written in 1918 by Frank Cecil MacDonald. It is a first-person narrative as well as a fast read and rather engaging. Private MacDonald, of the 1st Canadian Mounted Rifles, was taken prisoner at Mount Sorrel on the 2nd of June, 1916, which, incidentally, is the same day and the same place as 3 of Acadia's men were taken prisoner. MacDonald escaped prison in 1917. The second source is a group of letters and a diary written by Anthony Richard Shumiewski while he was a POW. The originals are held at the Beaton Institute, Cape Breton University. Private Shumiewski joined the 85th Battalion, and he was taken prisoner in a bungled raid around Arleux, France, in May 1917. Shumiewski died in a prison camp hospital in mid-1918. The third source is another book called 3 Times and Out, told by Melvin C. Simmons and written down in 1918 by Nellie McClung. The story is engaging and very easy to read, written in the first person. Private Simmons was a sniper who was taken prisoner on the 24th of April 1915. He made 3 attempts to escape, finally doing so on what I've calculated to be the 9th of September 1917. Now, using these sources, I've pieced together an idea of what the Canadian prisoners' experience might be in Germany. The POW camps were no vacation, no refuge from the hardships of the trenches. I say this knowing fully that all three sources have their own biases towards their captors. Before I continue on, let me stress the following three things. 1. This presentation is one-sided. My research was only concerned with the investigation of Canadian prisoners in Germany. 2. All three prisoners wrote about their experiences either during or shortly after their captivity. And 3. All three prisoners suffered some degree of trauma, which strongly influences their writing. Also, with respect to my sources, there are many biases within. For example, patriotism is very strong within the published sources. All sources discuss how prisoners worked for the Germans, and sometimes the sources use terms such as slaves and slavery for work. And the sources discuss the camps and the hospitals and the various treatment of the prisoners. It's fairly obvious that all three men are badly mistreated at times. With respect to food, all three sources seem to agree that the food was terrible. Starvation was a regular thing in the camps. None of the prisoners got enough to eat. All of them found creative ways to barter or find food. For example, Shumiewski was given a job in the camp's post office. Perhaps because he spoke many languages, he was used as an interpreter. This job may seem prestigious, but it was not. Having a job at the post office confined him to the camp while his fellow inmates were working in the fields. They could sneak plants to eat. He mentions this in a letter. He says, "The French Red Cross is not allowed into our present camp on account of the behavior of the boys while out on working parties. They are accused of destroying gardens and pulling out weeds and what they can get a hold of, but simply to eat it, to satisfy their hunger. Can you blame them? I can't." He wrote that on the 14th of July, 1917. MacDonald supports this claim when he discusses working on the farms. Quote, "We were told to go out the next day with a working party, with about 50 other Canadians. We were to work on a farm, and as we had heard that conditions were better than in an industrial plant, we were naturally somewhat jubilant." Unquote. But MacDonald's working party soon found out that the guards were harsh at the farms. He says, "Few British prisoners were trusted on those farms, and British or Canadian prisoners had a desire for destroying all he could and for doing as little work as possible." Prisoners in hospital did not fare much better. To escape working for the Germans, MacDonald purposefully injured himself a few times. What's more, he expected better treatment in hospital. He was wrong. He wrote, "While conditions in general were better, I suffered a good deal the first few months from lack of food. The parcel system had recently been taken over by the Red Cross, which supplied clothing, food, smokes, and all our hospital and medical supplies. The Red Cross made only one mistake. They stopped the old system before the new one was working, and in consequence, a lot of us who had been moved from one camp to the hospital were without any supplies for fully 2 months. These were mighty lean months, and most of us lived on porridge without milk or sugar, from oatmeal we had saved up. but they made us appreciate what the Red Cross was doing and how splendidly the system worked out afterward." End quote. Oddly enough, there were times when prisoners appeared to be treated well. Simmons and MacDonald both provide descriptions of these instances. Simmons wrote, "As prison camps go, Giessen is a good one. The place is well drained, the water is excellent, the sanitary conditions are good too. The sleeping accommodations are ample, there being no upper berths such as exist in all other camps I've seen. It is the show camp to which visitors are brought, who then, not having had to eat the food, write newspaper articles telling how well Germany treats her prisoners. If these people could see some of the other camps that I have seen, the articles would have to be modified." End quote. Incidentally, Arthur Cook, who's from the Acadia Collegiate Academy, was also imprisoned here for a short time. So we know from the evidence that visitors came to the camps, such as this show camp, to check on conditions. MacDonald writes about ambassadors inspecting camps on several occasions. Here's one of his stories. He said, "This yarn concerned the visit of an ambassador to the 3 camps around Munster in the summer of 1915. Camp No. 1 was the first visited. Here the prisoners were in a terrible state of filth and starvation, but in preparation for the officials' inspection, 2 huge carcasses of beef were laid out in the shop behind the kitchens. The officers told the visitor that the prisoners had been in a starving condition when they were captured, but that they were fed up on beef like that and expected to save most of their lives. When the ambassador left to visit Camp No. 3, the beef was dumped onto a motor truck and taken over there, where it was nicely laid out and a similar story told. The same proceeding followed for Camp No. 2, and when the inspection was over, the beef was taken out of the camps entirely and used for the German garrison in Munster." These ambassadorial visits seem to have had little impact on conditions for the prisoners. After 9 months in a camp, Shumiewski admitted in a letter home that, quote, "I have lost my self-control, not out of joy or happiness, but something I do not wish anybody to face. I never before knew what empty stomach was and what hunger meant." He wrote that on the 1st of February, 1918. Of the 3 men, Simmons best describes how food was used as punishment, especially during solitary confinement. Simmons said, "The guard shoved me in again to that infernal hole of blackness. He gave me a slice of bread. I had filled my pitcher at the tap. He continues, "This was my daily ration for the first 3 days. I was hungry, but I was not sick, for I had considerable reserve to call upon. But when the 4th day came, I was beginning to feel the weariness, which was not exactly a pain, but is worse than any pain. I soon learned to make my bread last as long as it would by eating it in installments, and it required some willpower to do this." End quote. What does this evidence tell us? These 3 sources, written by POWs who likely did not know each other, give clues about the conditions in the German camps. It is probable that prisoners were always hungry, forced to work, and mistreated in their internment. I would suggest that further research be done on prison camps to balance this evidence. For example, what were the conditions for German prisoners in British camps? Or what were the conditions for prisoners in Canadian internment camps? These experiences are outside of my research, but they are just as important to explore. Moreover, I suggest that all these experiences have application today. Human history is a story of conflict. Food is not benign in conflict. It is often used as a weapon. Understanding that relationship is important to our human experience. I want to give Private Simmons the final say in this presentation. He said, "There is a sense in which hunger sharpens a man's perceptions and makes him see the truth in a clearer light, but starvation, the slow, gnawing starvation, when the reserve is gone and every organ, every muscle, every nerve cries out for food, it is of the devil. The starving man is a brute with no moral sense than the gutter cat. His mind follows the same track. He wants food."